by the way, so they'll see that way. So
And here I am, Charles Moscowitz. Thanks for joining me, everyone. And the book that we're talking about right now is "They're Not Listening's: How the Elite Created the Nationalist Populist Revolution." I've got the co-author here, Ryan James Girdusky, who, along with Harlan Hill, wrote this book. Uh, Ryan is a political consultant and writer whose work has been featured in multiple publications, including the Washington Examiner, the American Conservative Magazine, The Week, Human Events, The Daily Caller, and townhall.com. Ryan, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
thank you for having me on, Charles.
My pleasure. Ryan, you are capturing the essence of what we would call the populist movement, which certainly precedes Donald Trump. I mean, we could look historically at it, but the election of Donald Trump, the Brexit movement in Britain, several other movements around the world, I would argue, the election in India of Modi, the rebellion in Hong Kong, Eastern European insistence on sovereignty. There's a wind flowing through Africa as well. Is essentially the reassertion of a very progressive idea, which is national sovereignty and the right of, it's a very democratic principle, which is the right of a people of a nation to determine their own lives and their own destinies. And it runs contrary to the trend that had heretofore been in place, certainly in this country and elsewhere, which is a kind of a gauzy globalist idea that we should all become a province of the world. And Trump represented a counter-revolution to that idea. What say you with regard to the election of Donald Trump? What did it mean to you?
Well, I was a day one Trump supporter, so I always thought he was going to be the nominee. I was, precarious if he was going to win, but I thought he was. I think that what the book covers, "They're Not Listening: How the Elites Created the National Populist Revolution," is that when Brexit happened and then Trump happened a few months later, we kind of saw the media sit there and react and say, "How is this happening? Why is this happening?" And they didn't sit there and see the buildup, the slow buildup over the course of 20 years. Now, the book really chronicles everything from 1998 until like 2019. So what was going on in the years preceding Donald Trump, where we saw Viktor Orban win in Hungary, we saw the Swiss People's Party win in Switzerland, we saw the Danish People's Party win in Denmark. We saw opinion poll after opinion poll after opinion poll sitting there and saying that the wars in the Middle East weren't going well, that we wanted less levels of legal immigration, that the trade, people had lower opinions of free trade, the opioid epidemic was boiling over. But those who could live anywhere, and those who chose to live somewhere, those who could live in any Western liberal city in the world, versus those who choose to live in the same place that they've buried their ancestors, had sorry, I hope this not
No, I'm
no,
okay.
those who chose to live somewhere versus those who can live anywhere, had a much different experience over the last 20 years. If you live in a place, like if you're black and you live in the Mississippi Delta, or you're Native American and you live in South Dakota on a reservation, or if you're white and you live in West Virginia or Kentucky, you have about 20 less years to live a life than you do if you're born outside Denver, Colorado. And I think that those in the elite areas of our country and institutions like academia and the media really didn't experience what the rest of the country was experiencing. So it was this slow boil, and that finally exploded, and it came with Donald Trump. And
Yeah.
the main point of the book, by chronicling it on a global level, is because so much of the media sits there and says that this is a racist, xenophobic, a bunch of old white reactionaries living in swing states or in northern England, when in fact it's happening across the entire world. It's the Democratic Center Party in Colombia, it's in Chile, it's in Angola, it's Modi, as you mentioned, in India, it's Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel. It crosses over between race and nationality and religion. And I think it's important to notice and note why all of these people in these places that have very little in common with each other are experiencing the same phenomenon.
Well, the only thing I might take issue with here is that I don't think it's that the media didn't understand or ignored what was going on. I think they did understand it, and they saw it as an enemy of what they believed in. And I think that I've never seen anything more negative in terms of their reaction. They threw out the window any objective methodology of journalism, and they just would rely on these lies or these one so-called anonymous sources, and they usually have one. And I'm
Well,
including the New York Times in this, and even our respected mainstream Mockingbird media. They would run with some really nasty story, and they would magnify it almost in a concerted way, all the major networks and papers, and they would do this every single day. It was like a real war
well,
against Trump.
I worked in the media in 2016 when Trump was running. I worked for the Washington Examiner, and I will tell you this: I don't think people even understood it, and I say that differently than and the one problem with the media, and chapter 2 of the book is dedicated to the media and to the misinformation of the media. And the problem with the media is that it's mainly a few things. It's too white, it's too liberal, it's too elite, and it exists too much in blue cities and blue counties. So because it exists only in those areas, they don't truly understand what anything in real America is like. If you try to find a journalist who works at the Washington Post, who goes to church on Sunday and is a gun owner, good luck. I mean, it says they don't
Yeah.
exist. It is very much a Greek, an echo chamber in a Greek orchestra, and it's just a repetition of everything that they know. And we saw this in the New York Times. Excuse me, in the New York Times with Senator Tom Cotton. Senator Tom Cotton wrote an op-ed that was absolutely fine and ended up costing someone their job because it hurt all the rest of their feelings. So rather than diversifying, they sat there and only amplified their bias. And after Trump was elected in 2016 and the media got it completely and totally wrong, we saw a lot of media outlets like the New York Times, like the Washington Post, and others hire another token conservative. But all they only hired were never Trumpers. They only hired the same
Right,
exact
they hired
people
the
who
same
are,
blue state, Eastern Seaboard types, and
yeah, the Dallas,
and as you
yeah.
say, Ryan, they don't understand what's going on in the rest of the country. They live in this very kind of cosmopolitan bubble, and they have contempt for like the South or for the Midwest or for the West, and express that openly. And I think the Tom Cotton example is a good one because for one time, one of the rare times the New York Times actually gave space to a point of view that might resonate with more conservative people, and it created this huge uproar. I recall that Michael Smerconish, he's a slightly left of center radio talk show host in Philadelphia, has been around for 30 years, long time guy, very balanced. Um, he made some mild comments on his program in 2017 that praised President Trump for some minor thing. He said, "I'm glad he did this." And the result was an avalanche of hate mail and vicious attacks and threats to his sponsors, people he'd known for 30 years, that they're going to boycott them. And so he backed down. He had to. It's that kind of irrational. I mean, this is what's meant by Trump derangement. I mean, it's
Oh,
you
Trump
know,
derangement syndrome is real. I don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's not real. It is very much real. And in fact, I was interviewing. This is about 2 years ago. I was interviewing for a job as a reporter in Washington D.C. And the person who was doing the hiring was a leftist. He was a liberal, and he sat there and said to me, "I can't hire a reporter from this town because they've all lost their minds." He's like, "I can't find somebody who's got any sense of self-control when it comes to Trump. It's irrational. They hate him, and they literally cannot even control themselves while hearing a debate about him."
well, Ryan, what do you think it's all about? I mean, I get the fact that they don't like conservatives. They certainly didn't like George W. Bush. Even we could go all the way back to Eisenhower. I mean, but
Right.
yet nothing quite like this. I mean, what is it about Trump and who he represents that has caused them to go so much off the deep end, in your opinion?
Well, let's even talk about the general culture. You are less and less and less likely to meet and to engage with somebody who's different than you. That is politically different than you, that has different life experiences. There's a great book by Charles Murray that I constantly reference in this book, called and now I'm blanking out on the name of the book, but it'll come to me. But Charles Murray talks about how there was a great sorting that went on, where it used to be you had wealthy people and let's not say poor, but working class and upper middle class people living in the same neighborhood, going to the same schools, existing in the same universe, marrying into the same families, and now you don't. And I think that also happens with politics now. You are just less likely to encounter anybody who's different than you. So the ability to deal with the ability to be intolerant towards those who have a different opinion than you is much stronger than it used to be. Um, and let's face it, on the culture issues, the left is winning. They are winning. They're winning. Um, while we sit there and we endlessly have arguments about, or originalism, they're sitting there and saying, no, let's pack the Supreme Court. Let's do whatever we want to do to sit there and upend the system so we win. Let's get rid of the Electoral College. It doesn't matter. We need to win. I say this in my book. Human beings are not intertwined by some kind of liberal humanism. We strive for two main things: security or power. Most people just want to be secure. They want to have a good job. They want to live in a safe neighborhood. They want their kids to go to good schools. There are sociopaths who want power. They tend to live in Washington. And and I think for most people, for the aspect of the book is that they took away both their power. The elites took away their power to feel like they're being advocated for, that they're being listened to, and they took away their security with our bad trade deals, with our mass immigration, with our bad foreign wars. And so losing all of those things, they sat there and said, well, let's just take the biggest hand grenade in the world, which was Donald Trump, and let's throw it in Washington, D.C. and see what happens.
They continue to push as a matter of faith this idea that Donald Trump has something against black men and women, and something against minorities, something against anyone who's not straight white male, actually.
Yeah.
And it's obviously false. I mean, the New York Times actually was going to do a story, which they spiked before the election, where they sent reporters into the Trump businesses to see, expected to find all white men, running the place. And they found that it was actually very diverse, and women had a very strong position in his businesses of responsibility, and minorities, and everything was by relative standards. So they decided not to run the story at all. And that this is a narrative that they are riding right up to the election. We're never going to hear the end of it. They're going to, even though that Trump had nothing to do with the terrible killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, was actually done in a very blue state with a very so-called progressive city and police department. They're going to hold that thing up just somehow to trigger this idea that Trump had something to do with it. It's similar to, I suppose, the Trayvon Martin story to be used against Mitt Romney, that somehow the people are conditioned almost like robotically to think that anyone that doesn't genuflect to the left has something against minorities. How do you combat that?
Well, okay, first, I think the most important thing that we could do is sit there and combat the narrative that we are living in a systemically racist country, because we're not. If you look at, so I'll point out two statistics. So first of all, if you look at the media coverage of police killings, you are 9 times as more likely to hear of a black person being killed by a white person, by a cop, than you are of a white person being hurt by a cop. And the amount of wokeist terminology of white supremacy, of white privilege, of being woke, of people of color, those terms have increased substantially over the last 15 years in our general language by the media. Anti-racism has become a religion in the media. So while the number of black men incarcerated in our prisons have dropped by 40% over 30 years, the number of black-owned businesses has increased. The gap between black and white graduation rates at high school are narrowing to their lowest ever. All the signs that you would want a society to go in are moving in the correct direction. You're having an increasing narrative by the media that things are going the opposite direction. The facts don't follow the storyline, but that doesn't matter. So they've expanded the idea of racism because they can't find legitimate racists anymore. Because you have to understand, with all these organizations, I'll put in a different topic. Let's say it was Moms Against Drunk Driving, and let's say they got a 99% drop in drunk driving cases. They would have no reason to exist as an organization. So you make up things to keep yourself going. You saw this with the Human Rights Campaign. They got gay marriage, so now it's about transgender rights. And you're seeing this a lot with all these anti-racism groups because racism doesn't exist, not nearly what existed half a century ago. We are seeing them expand the idea of racism. Hair is racist. Shoes are racist. Clothing is racist. Everything could possibly be racist to sit there on this
Oh yeah, I
expandatory
mean
thing.
they take out the so-called you know, they take a microscope out. The what do they call that? I mean, where they look under a microscope at someone to find a racist gene. That they were seen in 1954 in the presence of so and so.
Right,
Aha, they're
right.
racist, and they only do that against their enemies. I mean, they'll never put those same standards to like a guy like Joe Biden who
I mean,
supported segregation.
they have a bit. I mean, it's a very Foucaultian version of like the world to sit there and put everything in the perspective of today. I don't I don't subscribe to it, but anti-racism has become a religion. You can see them
Yeah.
how they wash the feet. I mean, it is they how they have like literal practices right now. It's what did someone say? It's the ethics of religion without the actual good parts, which are salvation and forgiveness. And so that is what has become a religious, institution. I think the most important thing to do is combat it with actual facts and sit there and say, no, your lives are not getting worse, and no, you're not as much of a victim as you think you are, and no, this is all feel-good nonsense. I had a debate with two liberal friends of mine about this, and I just destroyed every one of their arguments at the end. I kind of come with the Ann Coulter belief of if you don't leave your enemies in a sputtering rage, it's not you didn't do a very good job. But I think that's the main thing is to fight again. Don't sit there and concede 1 inch. Don't sit there and say, oh, yes, but. No, it's not yes, but. We don't live in a systemically racist country. There are things that we could reform that could be positive that I'm all about. We're human. Everything is not perfect, but do not concede the point that we are by our nature flawed and that this is a racist nation and it's incapable of ever being better. That's a complete lie.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, the whole idea that they would phrase and view this country in that light is really just a symptom of a more anti-American view, anyway, of a very negative, glass half empty view of this country because it fits into their particular ideology. And meanwhile, Donald Trump has been very proactive when it comes to helping minorities. I mean, his Prison Reform Act, the step one, released about 10,000 men, black,
Yeah, I
predominantly
wasn't a
black.
fan of that.
Maybe not, but the point is that 90% of the men released were black, and that they were in prison for minor crimes that were put in place during the Clinton administration and by Senator Joe Biden. I mean, he's the first
Yes,
president to
but if you
consistently contribute to historically black colleges. I mean, across the board. I mean, we could, whether we agree or not, the point is that his policies with regard to African American communities are very progressive, and and are quite tangible. It's
but
not like just they're
here's
not
the thing.
sitting around, bowing with kente cloth. They're actually engaging in policies that are, I would argue, moving the ball down the road.
Yeah, but I think that the problem that the Trump administration doesn't understand is that perception is reality. So you could do as many good things as you want, but if it's not perceived like that, I watched a lot of black television and listen to black radio, and right after the First Step Act was announced, because I wanted to see what they talked about, and the first thing they sat there and said was, "Don't credit Jared Kushner with this. Don't credit Donald Trump with this." So it
Oh,
doesn't really
it
matter
doesn't matter. Yeah.
it doesn't matter what you do because perception is reality, and you need to fight the perception, not the reality. And that's one thing that the Trump administration has not done successfully. Now, Trump has made gains with the Hispanic community and sizably with Hispanic men. I think that probably this upcoming election, Trump will probably do better with Hispanic men than with college-educated white women. But perception is everything, and that is really the one battle that he's failed to make when it comes to the black community, and something that he should be, more aggressive in, and less you know less patronizing in the way that they sit there and they try to appeal. But we did the First Step Back for drug. Okay, drug crimes are not the one thing the black community cares about. It's extremely
No, they care about
patronizing.
entrepreneurialism and to make, getting back into business and having a
Right,
pro.
but it's a very patronizing way of sitting there and saying it, which was coming out of Jared Kushner's mouth in the White House quite a bit. I think that if you want to fight the, you have to understand there's two things about the black community with the voting habits. One, there are three generations of black Americans that will never vote Republican, ever,
Right,
ever,
of
ever,
course,
ever. So
of
you're
course.
talking about the most recent two generations of black voters who are more open-minded to it and are less beholden to the Democratic Party. You can make it. Trump has made inroads with younger black men. There is polling to sit there and show that is true, but they make up 1% of the population. So really, to spend as much effort with the idea that they were building coalitions in the black community is really kind of fruitless. I think if Trump loses this upcoming election, the reason he will have lost is not because he didn't do enough to reach out to the black community. I think it's because he didn't do enough to reach out to working class white voters that got him in the White House in the first place.
Okay. Well, you're in the business of consulting and perception building and analysis. What is your analysis, Ryan, with regard to how the this administration can position itself in the upcoming election?
Well, I think that the coronavirus gives us actually an immense amount of opportunity because, I mean, and a lot of it's missed opportunity at this point with unfortunately with the Republicans in the Senate, but a big part of the problem that we are having in this country as far as manufacturing goes and supply chains is that the Midwest has a very dilapidated infrastructure. Our infrastructure in the Midwest is something like 30 years behind the times, or 40 years behind the times in some cases. They don't have good Wi-Fi, they don't have good rail, they don't have good roads. And I think that this time, when we're trying to bring supply chains home, we could reorganize our infrastructure in the Midwest to sit there and really appeal to manufacturing and bringing jobs back in the states that matter the most for winning re-election. And the fact that that has not been a priority is shocking to me right now in the
Hmm.
Trump administration. So many people are saying we want to go back to normal, but normal wasn't working. So in this time where we're looking at restructure, I mean, look how many times past presidents have used disasters to reshape the country. FDR in the case of the Great Depression, and George W. Bush after 9/11, Barack Obama after the global recession. Um, Trump could do that with the coronavirus. We could remake the country to make it better for working class people. And I don't. My problem right now with the administration and with the Senate Republicans is there's no vision like the way they have on the left. If AOC or Bernie Sanders were elected president, I know the vision that they would have for the country. Running on tax cuts and economic economic opportunity zones is not a vision for the country. I need a tangible vision for what this country is going to look like under a Republican administration, and that's what voters need. And I don't think that he's done a very good job at vocalizing that to the fullest effect that he could.
Interesting. I mean, I think that he's certainly trying to fulfill a very solid vision, and in his case, one that goes back decades. But he should be articulating it better. And you're right about his reaching his base, which is, iron belt, working class people, union members, blue collar workers, people who really do feel left out
You have to remember
of the
five.
equation.
You have to remember 5 million Trump voters voted for Obama twice. They didn't. I mean, it's so important to realize how many Obama voters he reached by promising to restructure the economy. In the Midwest right now, most of those areas that he promised manufacturing jobs never went there. They went to Texas, they went to California, they went to Arizona, they went to Nevada, they went to the Sun Belt. It's so important to sit there, and those are the places that have been screwed over by past administrations decade after decade. Put the thumb of the federal government in favor of those areas. Sit there and lean on them to sit there and create some kind of change in those areas and make it possible. That's how you're going to make Michigan a red state for the next 30 years. That's how you're going to make Pennsylvania a red state for the next 30 years, by sitting there and accomplishing those goals to make those areas livable. Because what happens also when you have the infrastructure, one, you're creating demand in other sectors of the economy because someone's got to produce the steel, someone's got to produce the gravel, someone's got to produce the construction. But you're also sitting there when those roads and the infrastructure is created and manufacturing moves in, well, you'll create dozens of other companies, because someone's got to cut the hair of the guy making the cars, and someone's got to do, all those things will happen if we lean on it. And those are the areas I think that he has not done enough to sit there and actually move the ball forward on, which is really, really important. I talk about this in the book, They're Not Listening, about how that economic despair and economic anxiety is so important to understanding why National Populists became powerful in every single country, from people in Calais in northern France to voters in Wisconsin.
There you go. Well, Ryan, I hope that you have a great, basically a great outline for the election, and you got a good handle on it. I'm glad you wrote this book. I hope you can reach the Trump campaign and the Trump people.
Oh, I've been trying.
Okay, because you do present a very good platform for them, and it would be great if they could hear that, and they better hear it soon. Yeah. Anyway, Ryan, again, where can people get your excellent book?
Oh, Barnes & Noble's, Amazon, Books A Million. It's all over the place. It's available for sale. And yeah, I think if you're a supporter of national populism, this book has 700 citations. It explains why you feel what you feel. So when you make an argument to somebody, you could sit there and give great citations. And if you're an opponent of national populism, it explains what's going on. And if you want national populism to stop, you want to sit there and change the clock, these are the issues you need to address to win voters back. Because it is possible to win them back, but you need to address these issues in a way you haven't done so far.
Excellent. All right, Ryan, listen, I want to thank you very much for joining me. They're Not Listening is the book. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.